Ḥayy ibn Yaqẓān, a philosophical tale by Ibn Tufayl, translated by L E Goodman. L E Goodman leaves an exceedingly long 105 pages of preface and introduction to the tale and to its author, Ibn Tufayl, who lived in the 12th century in Moorish Spain. And I may leave a link or something to him so that you can read it. Maybe I can find a link to the text itself so that you can read the 105 pages. It is interesting, but I prefer to get right to the meat of the matter rather than hear all the subtext and all the influences that this had, that this came from. Those who are interested in the hermeneutics of it and want a full exegesis of the text, can. And occasionally, I do like to delve into it, but when the analysis is longer than the text itself, I think that's a problem. So while I'm happy to link L E Goodman's introduction and preface in the description of the video, I think we're just going to go right for the text itself. So, Ḥayy ibn Yaqẓān, a philosophical tale of Ibn Tufayl. In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, God bless our Master Muhammad, his house and companions, and grant them peace. Noble brother, my dear kind friend, God grant you eternal and everlasting happiness. You have asked me to unfold for you, as well as I am able, the secrets of the Oriental philosophy, mentioned by the Prince of Philosophers, Avicenna. Then you must know from the start that if you want the truth without flummery, you must seek it, and seek it diligently. Your request set off a stream of ideas in me, praise God, which lifted me to a state of sublimity I had never known before, a state so wonderful the tongue cannot describe or explain it, for it belongs to another order of being, a different world. But the joy, delight, and bliss of this ecstasy are such that no one who has reached it, or even come near it, can keep the secret or conceal the mystery. The lightheadedness, expansiveness, and joy which seize him force him to blurt it out in some sweeping generality, for to capture it precisely is impossible. If he be the sort whose mind has not been sharpened by intellectual pursuits, he may speak unwisely. Thus, in this state, one said, "Praise be to me, great am I." Another said, "I am the truth." Another, "There is within this robe nothing but God." It was his own attainment of this ecstasy that Ghazali attempted to portray when he wrote, "It was what it was harder to say, think the best, but don't make me describe it away." But his was a mind refined by learning and education. Look at the words Ibn Tufayl appended to his discussion of communion with the divine. Quote, "Once these ideas are understood, it will be clear that nothing learned in ordinary studies can reach this level, for once this concept is grasped, the mind can see itself as cut off from all that went before, with new convictions that cannot have arisen from the world of matter, too splendid to have sprung from the material, since they are cleansed of all the compositeness characteristic of the physical world. Surely, it would be more appropriate to call them divine ecstasies, granted by God to those he will." The level to which Ibn Tufayl refers is reached by use of reason, and no doubt he reached it, but he did not surpass it. The level of which I spoke at the outset is something quite different, although the two are alike in that nothing revealed here contradicts what is revealed by reason. The difference is in an increase in what is seen, and in the fact that this is experienced through what I must only figuratively call a faculty, for neither in popular language nor in specialized terminology can I find any expression for it. This ecstasy, to the taste of which I was brought by your request, is one of a number of stages in the progress of the devotee, as reported by Avicenna. Quote, Then, when his training and willpower reach a certain point, glimmerings of the light of truth will flicker before him, thrilling him like lightning, flashing and going out. If he is diligent in his ascetic practice, these spells grow more and more frequent until they come unasked, entrancing him without the use of exercises. No matter what he sees, he will turn from it to the sacred presence, reminded of some aspect of the divine, and again he will be overwhelmed. Thus, he begins to see the truth in everything. Finally, his efforts bring him to a stage where his moments of recognition turns to tranquil contemplation, his stolen glimpses, familiarity, his spark, a limpid flame. He has gained an understanding as unshakable as that of an old friendship." End quote. Avicenna goes on to describe the gradual progress of the devotee, culminating as his inmost being becomes a polished mirror, facing toward the truth. Sublime delight pours over him, and he rejoices in his soul at all the marks it bears of truth. At this level, he sees both himself and the truth. He still hesitates between them, but then becomes oblivious to self. He is aware only of the sacred presence. Or, if he is at all aware of himself, it is only as one who gazes on the truth. At this point, communion is achieved. Now, these states, as Avicenna describes them, are reached not by theorizing, not by syllogistic deductions, postulating premises, and drawing inferences, but solely by intuition. If you wish an analogy to make clear the difference between this sort of apprehension and all others, imagine a child growing up in a certain city, born blind, but otherwise intelligent and well endowed, with a sound memory and an apt mind. Through his remaining channels of perception, he will get to know the people as well as all sorts of animals and objects, and the streets and alleys, houses and markets, eventually well enough to walk through the city without a guide, recognizing at once everyone he meets. But colors, and colors alone, he will know only by descriptive explanations and ostensive definitions. Suppose after he had come this far, his eyesight were restored, and he could see. He would walk all through the town finding nothing in contradiction to what he had believed, nor would anything look wrong to him. The colors he encountered would conform to the guidelines that had been sketched out for him. Still, there would be two great changes. The second, dependent on the first. First, the daybreak on a new visual world. And second, his great joy. Those who merely think and have not reached the level of love are like the blind. The colors at that stage, known only by accounts of their names, are those experiences which Ibn Bajjah said are too splendid to arise in the physical world, which God grants to those of his worshippers whom he chooses. But to those who reach love, God grants what I purely metaphorically call another faculty. This corresponds to the restoration of sight, and sometimes, rarely, there comes a man whose eyes, as it were, are always open, whose glance is always piercing, who does not need to search. When I speak of the rationalist method, God raise you to the level of love, I do not confine myself to their knowledge of the physical world, any more than I confine myself to the metaphysical when I speak of intuition. The two modes of apprehension are quite distinct and are not to be confused. But what I mean by the rationalist apprehension includes his understanding of the metaphysical, for example, that of Ibn Bajjah. It is a necessary condition of what is reached by pure reason that it be true and valid. Thus, the difference between the rationalists and those who enjoy intimacy is that while both are concerned with the self-same things, the latter enjoy a clearer view and far greater delight. Ibn Bajjah censured them for the pursuit of this joy. He claimed it was a product of their imagination, and even promised a clear and distinct description of just how ecstasy ought to be enjoyed. Here's the answer he deserves, quote, "Do not declare too sweet fruits you have not tasted, and do not trample on the necks of the saintly." The man did not in fact keep this promise or any such thing. What prevented him, perhaps, was that, as he himself said, he was pressed for time with the trouble of getting down to Iran. Or perhaps he felt that describing this state would force him to say something derogatory to his own way of life, or at odds with his encouragement of amassing wealth and the use of various artful dodges to acquire it. But I digress. It seems clear now that your request must fall within either one or the other of these two objectives. You may be asking what is actually seen by those who undergo the experience and reach intimacy. If so, this is something which cannot be put into a book. Whenever anyone tries to entrust it to words or to the written page, its essence is distorted and it slips into that other purely theoretical branch of discourse. For, clothed in letters and sounds and brought into the perceptible world, it cannot remain in any way what it was. Accounts of it thus differ widely. Many stray into error by trying to describe it, yet presume others to have strayed who have never left the path. All this is because it is something vast, infinite, encompassing but unencompassed. On the other hand, you may desire a discursive, intellectualized introduction to this experience, and this, God honor you with his intimacy, is something that can be put into words and set down in books, but it is rarer than red sulfur, especially in our part of the world. For the experience is so arcane that only one lone individual, and then another, can master the most trifling part of it. And even those who do win some bit of it speak of it publicly only in riddles, because our true, orthodox, and established faith guards against a hasty plunge into such things. Do not suppose the philosophy which has reached us in the books of Aristotle and Farabi or in Avicenna's healing will satisfy you if this is what you need, or that any Andalusian has written anything adequate on this subject. The reason is that before the spread of philosophy and formal logic to the West, all native Andalusians of any ability devoted their lives to mathematics. They achieved a high level in that field, but could do no more. The next generation surpassed them in that they knew a little logic, but study logic as they may, they could not find in it the way to fulfillment. It was one of them who wrote, "How can it be that life's so small? 2 sciences we have, that's all. One is truth beyond attaining, the other vain and not worth gaining." This generation was succeeded by a third better thinker, sands closer to the truth. Of these, none had a sharper mind, a sounder method, or truer views than Ibn Tufayl. But he was so preoccupied with material success that death carried him off before his intellectual storehouses could be cleared and all of his hidden wisdom made known. Most of his extant books are unfinished and break off abruptly before the end, like his De Anima, his Discipline of the Solitary, and his writings on logic and natural science. His only completed works, in fact, are outlines and hasty essays. He himself admits this when he says that the argument for the idea he was trying to convey in his essay on communion with the divine was put into clear language only with painful difficulty. That in places the organization is weak, and that if he'd had more time, he'd have liked to have rewritten it. This is as much as I can find out about the man, since I never knew him personally. As for those of his contemporaries allegedly on a par with him, I have seen none of their works. Their successors, however, our own contemporaries, are as yet at a developmental stage, or else their development has halted prematurely, unless there are some of whom I don't yet have a full report. Those of Farabi's books that have reached us are for the most part on logic. and those on philosophy are full of doubts. In the ideal religion, he affirms that souls of the wicked live on forever in infinite torments after death. But in his civil politics, he says plainly that they dissolve into nothing, and that only the perfected souls of the good achieve immortality. Finally, in his commentary on Aristotle's Ethics, discussing human happiness, he says that it exists only in this life, and on the heels of that has words to the effect that all other claims are senseless ravings and old wives' tales. This makes mankind at large despair of God's mercy. It puts the wicked on the same level with the good, for it makes nothingness the ultimate destiny of us all. This is an unspeakable lapse, an unforgivable fall. This, on top of his misbelief, openly avowed that prophecy belongs properly to the imagination, and his preference of philosophy to revelation, and many more failings which I pass over. As for the works of Aristotle, Avicenna undertook an exposition of their contents in accordance with Aristotelian thinking, and he followed Aristotle's philosophical approach in his own healing. But at the start of the book, he admits that the truth for him is something quite different. This book was written in the manner of the Peripatetics, but if you want the truth without obfuscation, you must study his writings on Oriental philosophy. If you take the trouble to plow through the healing and the Aristotelian corpus, you will find that on most subjects they agree, although there are some things in the healing that don't come down to us in Aristotle. But if you take everything in Aristotle and the literal reading of the healing without grasping its subtle inner meaning, you will end up, as Avicenna warns, far from perfection. Even Ghazali's works, because he preached the masses bind in one place and loose in another. First, he says a thing is rank faithlessness. Then, he says it's permissible. One ground on which he charges the philosophers with unbelief in the incoherence of the philosophers is their denial of the resurrection of the flesh, and their assertion that only souls are meted out rewards and punishment. But at the beginning of A Scale of Actions, he definitely attributes this belief to the Sufi masters, while in The Rescue from Wrong and Discovery of Ecstasy, he says that he accepts the Sufi teaching, although he came to it only after long searching. Much of this sort of inconsistency will be found in his books by anyone who spends long studying them. He even offers some apology for this practice at the end of The Scale of Actions, in his tripartite division of ideas into those held in common with the masses, those exhorting all who seek the truth, and those a man keeps to himself, and divulges only to people who share his beliefs. Finally, he writes, "If my words have done no more than to shake you in the faith of your fathers, that would have been reason enough to write them. For he who does not doubt does not look, and he who does not look will not see, but must remain in blindness and confusion." He illustrates the point with this couplet: "Forget all you've heard and clutch what you see. At sunrise, what use is Saturn to thee?" Such apothegms were characteristic of his teaching. Most of what he said was in the form of hints and intimations, of value to those who hear them only after they have found the truth by their own insight, or to someone innately gifted and primed to understand. Such men need only the subtlest hints. In his Gems of the Quran, Ghazali said that he had written certain esoteric books which contain the unvarnished truth. So far as I know, no such book has reached Spain, although some claim that certain books we have received are in fact this hidden corpus. Nothing could be further from the truth. The books in question are Modes of Awareness and The Smoothing, The Breath of Life, and Related Problems. Granted that these books contain many hints, they still add little to what is disclosed in his better-known works. His perfect understanding of the lovely names of God, in fact, has matter far more recondite than these, and Ghazali himself tells us that this is not an esoteric book, which means that these which we have could not be among them. One of our contemporaries, basing himself on Ghazali's statements at the end of A Lamp for the Lights, charges him with a crime monstrous enough to cast him into an inescapable pit. After discussing those veiled by light, Ghazali goes on to speak of those who achieve communion with the divine. He says, they know this being as characterized by an attribute which would tend to negate his utter unity. This critic wishes to impute that Ghazali believed God, the first and the truth. Praise be he, and far exalted above the aspersions of the wicked, has some plurality in his being. I have no doubt that our teacher Ghazali was among those who reached this sublime goal and enjoyed the ultimate bliss. Nonetheless, his esoteric books on mysticism have not reached us. I myself would not have garnered what truth I had attained, the culmination of my intellectual efforts, without pursuing the arguments of Ghazali and Avicenna, checking them one against the other, and comparing the result with the views that have sprung up in our era, so fervently admired by self-appointed philosophers, until finally I was able to see the truth for myself, first by thought and theory, and now in my first brief taste of the actual experience. I feel able now to set down a view to be preserved in my name, and because of our close friendship, I want you to be the first to whom I express myself. Nonetheless, if I tell you of the highest levels I reached without first going over the preliminary steps that led there, it would do you no more good than blind faith, as if you approved not because my arguments warrant acceptance, but because we are friends. I expect better of you than that. I won't be satisfied until you go higher, for this much can't guarantee salvation, let alone conquering the highest peaks. I want only to bring you along the paths in which I have preceded you, and let you swim in the sea I have just crossed, so that it may bear you where it did me, and you may undergo the same experience, and see with the eyes of your soul all that I have seen. Then you will not need to confine yourself within the limits of my knowledge. This will demand no small amount of time, free of all other concerns, for devotion to this endeavor. But if you work hard, you'll be glad in the morning of the ground you gained at night. Your efforts will be blessed. You will please your Lord. He will please you. I shall be at your side as long as you need me, to lead you where you wish to go by the shortest, safest, and most unobstructed route. To give you a glimpse of the road that lies ahead, let me tell you the story of Ḥayy ibn Yaqẓān, Absal, and Salaman, who were given their names by Avicenna himself. For the tale points a moral for all with heart to understand, a reminder for anyone with a heart or ears to listen and hear.